Awesome. Okay. So today's topic is on tools for open collaboration, licenses, and README. Who am I? My name is Precious Onyewuchi. It's fine if you cannot pronounce the surname, just say Precious, it's fine. I work officially as an open source manager for the Data Science Without Borders project affiliated with OSPO now. I am an SSI fellow for 2026. Whoop whoop. And the logos below are communities that I am affiliated with. For today's topic, I'd just like to let everybody know that I am not a lawyer. I just know a little bit about licenses in open source to be able to talk about them. Um, yeah, we'll be talking about licenses specifically for open source and then also readmes because one, we have projects that we want to talk about. So how do we share these projects? And then licenses are important for us to let us know how much we can share or not share, and then readmes enables us to be able to write enough about the project so people can learn about them or they can contribute to them if they are interested in it. And then we have like a very short activity session where you can create your own readmes. So licenses. What are licenses? In general, a license or still license, the spelling is just different, is an official permission or permit to do, use, or own something, as well as the document of that permission or permit. This is a Wikipedia definition. Open source licenses specifically are licenses that comply with the open source definition. In brief, they allow software to be freely used, modified, and shared. Software is slightly is like the broader term because when open source licenses were being defined, or when open source was actually being defined, it was defined specifically for software. But as time has gone on, we've been able to use it for presentations, images, books, papers, data. And so these different materials have been created with different types of licenses that we'll talk about as we go on. So why should we use licenses? We've built something really amazing. You have like a really cool project or a really great paper that you think other people would be able to make use of. So to be able to enable them make use of it or remix and share your work, you want to add like a license, right? How can we do that? We add an open license for use, for remixing, and then for sharing. So some common misconceptions is if I put something in the public or on GitHub, it means that anybody can use it. That's wrong. You need to actually add the appropriate license to enable future users know exactly how much they can use your project. Does it have to be an open source project if they make use of it? Can they use it in a commercial or proprietary way? Basically, if I make use of your material to create something that I sell, is that fine? So that's like a adding licenses to your project enable people to be able to know that if you do not add a license, it's not automatic that it's not like a giving that anybody knows that they can now make use of your project. So sharing your work with a license does not also give away your own copyright. It does not make the project no longer your own or change the IP value of it. And using work shared with an open license without attribution, it can be legal, but it's a violation of academic ethics. If you make use of somebody else's work, please attribute and credit them. So explaining the different type of licenses. So there's proprietary license, which is more restrictive, right? This one is copyrights, like we know. It's somebody's rights to their work. And then copyleft is sort of like the opposite of it, where it gives the right, I'm still using right, but yeah, it gives the right for other people to be able to know how to use and share your work collaboratively. Permissive is a little looser, but it's also within the same category. But for copyleft, it means that if you're making use of this project, more likely the other projects that come out of it have to make use of that same type of license. I'll explain the different types as we go ahead. But yeah, so some licenses expect you that if you make use of my project and it's probably like open source, that is derived out of it, like a derivative work, has to be open source too. But for permissive, it's fine for you to make use of my work as long as I'm accredited, but you can use it to create something that you can sell, right? And then public domain is least restrictive. We won't cover that because it's not like um it's not relative to what we're talking about. But public domain is that it's more open, anybody can use it, but it doesn't have like an open source license. Um, yeah. And then the different spectrum of rights, we have the copyright. There's all rights are reserved. Original creator, you own everything. It's yours. Creative Commons, some rights are reserved. Reuse is permitted without permission under the specifications shared in the license. And then public domain, there are no rights reserved. The original creator has most likely given up their rights, so you don't see like maybe a CC by attached to it, but it's public knowledge that nobody has it anymore. Anybody can make use of it, but it's not the same thing as an open source license because open source licenses have to have that particular indication that this is how you can use my work and this is how you can share my work with others. Right. So, a fictional scenario. I create a data visualization of my favorite emoji. Can people write their favorite emojis? Let me see. I'm just going to share mine. But, ooh, why is it hard to see? I can't find it. But it's a smug looking emoji. But yeah, imagine you created like a data visualization of your favorite emoji and you store the file on a public GitHub repository. Without a license, no one can legally use the data for a research paper or for an app or combining with other data because it does not have my permission. But to be able to enable other people make use of that data visualization that I have shared, I can give permission for specific uses. You can use it to like maybe add in an image in a book that you're writing or something you want to talk about maybe the evolution of emojis if you decide to write a research paper on it. And then as a copyright holder, I can also give permission to the public for different general uses. So truly open licenses have common elements. It's anybody can use it for any purpose. It can also be modified. It can be distributed, both the original and the modified work to anyone else with the same license. In particular, I have added the study part, but it's in a smaller format because the definition that it's more popular is freely used, modified, and shared. But study is also like an important aspect of an open source license because for people to be able to modify your work, they need to first of all learn about it and review it to know how to modify it to fit their use case. So open licenses for documentation. So maybe for software projects, you most likely have to use like an MIT license or a BSD license, that sort of thing. But for documentation, for example, like my presentation, I don't know if we saw in the beginning, but it has a CC by 4.0. The attribution, it must always credit me, is it can sometimes be non-commercial, which is use it but don't make money. It can be your version must equal mine, no changes, or share like it means if I allow you to change it, you have to make sure that you repeat the same license that you used when you were deriving it from my work. So again, we see the spectrum of rights here. It's all rights reserved for copyright, which means reuse requires the permission from the copyright owner. Sometimes for more popular projects or maybe music. I think music is like the more common one that I can think of when it comes to things like copyright. If you want to make use of like a popular artist, you have to either pay or get their permission to make use of it. If you upload probably on YouTube without the adequate copyright permissions, either maybe your video might be taken down or the material that you've taken up would be banned. And then for Creative Commons, some rights are reserved. Reuse is permitted without permission under the specifications shared in the license. And then public domain, no rights are reserved. It may be used, but without permission. Right. So for software licenses, we have the copyleft licenses, which I said is like a direct opposite of what a copyright is, which is I give you licenses and this is how you can use and share my work with others. So there's a general public license, there's a lesser general public license. The difference between both of them is under copyleft, they are like really strong copylefts and weaker copylefts. So the stronger copyleft licenses and basically say if you're making use of this license, every other thing you create under this work has to use the same license in the future, right? And then the lesser ones are a little bit not as restrictive, but it's still gives you that direction on how to use and how to collaborate in the future. So there's a Mozilla public license and then there's the Eclipse public license. This is for software. And then the permissive licenses are more, they're not as restrictive as copyleft licenses. You can make use of them to create commercial or proprietary software. There's Apache license, there's a BSD license, there's an MIT license, and then there is an unlicensed. So again, we see like the different types of licenses, the proprietary, which is very restrictive, the copyleft, slightly restrictive, permissive is not as restrictive as a copyleft, and then a public domain is one where the rights have been relinquished to the public. Right. So most open licenses require crediting the authors of the work. For non-copyleft, which is permissive, non-reciprocal, we have the CC BY, we have the MIT and the BSD. They don't require derivative works to be shared with the same license. For copyleft, it's viral is reciprocal. CC by SA, which is a CC by share alike. GPLv3, which we saw a few. I'm sorry. Yeah, which is the general public license, and then we see the MPL 2.0, which is in Mozilla. So they require derivative works to be shared with the same license. Some exceptions will be the CCO, which is public domain. Nobody owns the copyright. So how to apply a license? I'm going to there. I've attached some images to show, and then while we are creating our readmes, when you're either maybe creating the GitHub repository or using the templates, you get the option to add the license. So that's something that I would also explore. But how to apply a license would be you have to place the full text of the license in a file named license in the root directory. So when you Google the open source initiative, it has like a list of different licenses that are created depending on the type of work or license you'd like to apply to your work. There's a whole text. If you create a license file in your directory, you copy that text and put in there. So you apply licenses to all components. For content, it's a CC BY. For software, you use an MIT, and for a data, obviously open data, CC 0. And then you describe in your README what license applies to which part of your work, which we'll get to in a few slides. So data is not the same thing as code or creating works. Right, so this is like a GitHub image. When you're creating a repository, you have different options. There's the choose visibility, start with the templates, add readme, add gitignore, and then add license. Specifically for this part, you can see different licenses that GitHub will suggest to you. There's the Apache license, the GNU General Public License, the MIT license, the BSD2 Cross Simplify license. I will not read everything. But yeah, different licenses are given, and obviously, oh my god, sorry. If you scroll down, there are still some. You pick the one that is relative to your project, depending on how restrictive you want to be. Do you want future users to be able to make money off your work or to make it proprietary and you won't mind? Then you most likely want to pick like an MIT license because that's permissive. If you want future users to make sure that it's consistently copyleft, every single time it's used, it has to be open source. It cannot be proprietary, that sort of thing. You most likely have to put like a general public license. There are two ways. So you can either do this when you're creating your repository and click on the add license option, or when you're creating a license file, because it has to always be license.md. GitHub will suggest license templates for you, and then you can pick them from there. Right, I think I can pause here in case maybe there are questions or anything, and I'll go ahead to read these. Hello.
Hey, I don't think I've ever seen a repository with more than one license. I feel like people usually use one, and that applies for everything, code, documentation, wherever is in there. So, do you recommend having more than one to kind of specify probably which applies to what?
Well, to be fair, like you said, the more common one would be using one license for all of them. But I would imagine that if you were working with probably sensitive data, but you wanted the documentation about that work to be public, you would most likely have to use two different types of licenses. Or maybe don't make the data public at all, right? But in cases where, or maybe you have specific people that would most likely have to access it, then you want to use like a license that will protect that data or protect the information, and then maybe use like a more public type of license for the documentation, and then maybe presentations that would come out of that work that you've done. Hi, Cass.
I was trying to, I've got it somewhere, but the reason to apply multiple licenses is like, as Precious was saying, like there's a license for code, there's a license for documentation, and I don't read the full text of the license, but the features of the code are legally protected in a license that's written for code. So that's why you don't use a CC BY license for code. And I think it's something about like it would have to be embedded in every file or something like that, literally about how like it's kind of translates into applying it. So if you had a repo that had multiple things, this is what Precious is saying, if you have a repo that has code and documentation and data, then you need to have different licenses to cover all those different facets. And it's as easy as just identifying, this is what I'm using for code, this is what I'm... Alternatively, if you've got a lovely tidy GitHub that is like, this repo is only code, this repo is only documentation, then absolutely you can have them separated.
Thank you, Cass. Do we have any other questions? Do I go ahead? Okay, I'm going ahead now. Let's see. So for readmes, what is a readme? The README is often like the first item a visitor will see when visiting your repository. So README files typically include information on what your project does, why the project is useful, how users can get started with the project, where users can get help with your project, and who maintains and contributes to the project. So for this particular topic, I will just make use of already existing READMEs and then break them down based on each subtitle that is here. So for example, yeah, but before we go there, should we use readmes? Able to understand and contribute to your work, should they want to. Also, for cases like licenses, readmes are where users will be able to know what licenses project has, right? So it gives like a brief information for a first-time visitor to your project. How can we do this? We create a readme to aid open sharing and just basically knowledge sharing, really. So this is the chaos repository. We see that there is a first example. What is this project about? We have content for the community documentation that is included. There's a link to it, to the website, for readers to be able to know more about the project. There's other documentation that applies to the entire chaos community. There is information on the operational and process documentation not published to the website. There is information on the DEI project badge, which represents the commitment to creating diversity, equity, and inclusion in the community. And then there is information on the use of issues, and then also how to contribute to the repository. Then somewhere down, we see maintainers of the project. So if I was coming to the Chaos project for the first time, there's a link attached. Sorry. Okay. You have basically all the information you need to know about this project, right? The next one is the Turing Way, and Turing Way has one of the most detailed README projects that README pages that exists, at least as much as I've seen, right? So you see general information about what the Turing Way project is. It's a handbook to reproducible, ethical, and collaborative data science. There is information on all the stakeholders, basically explaining to you different people that can make use of the Turing Way project, even images. There are there's a small brief intro. Basically, it's still answering the question of what is this project, right? And then there's like a table of content. Shows you about the project governance, contributing, how you can contribute to the Turing Way project, different ways to collaborate, different ways to cite the Turing Way, and then and then the different contributors that exist in the project. So basically, going back, we see that most of the readmes that have the two readmes shows what the project does, because people may not be able to come find, oh, who's the maintainer. Is something that just exists on the internet. I saw something really cool and I want to know what's about the project. Your README gives that information. It explains why the project is useful, how users can get started with the project, where users can get help with your project if they need to, and who maintains and project and contributes to the project. In case they need to reach out to somebody, it's easy for them to do that. So before we actually do the activity, for our activity, we'll be creating our own README. There are two ways to do that. You can either add a README page from scratch when you create a repository, and then you just click the toggle button and GitHub automatically adds a page that you edit. Am I good with the assumption that most of us know Markdown? I'm sorry I didn't ask this, but are we familiar with Markdown? Seeing some yeses, okay, some thumbs up. Cool. Amazing. Great. Because that's mostly what we use to write this. And then you can also use a template. For this one in particular, we'll be making use of a template that you can just adjust and edit, so it's easy. Um, this is a picture of the Turing templates. There's different headings. So about the repository, you can just give like a very brief explanation of your project. Feel free to delete and edit as you need. And then the second image shows, so when you click on the link that is provided, I'm going to share that too. You see how to use the templates. You have to create like a new repository for your project. What a README is not, it is not the only documentation for your project. As you can see, the two projects that I've cited, for example, Chaos, there is a main website where there is documentation for the projects. And then if you go deeper, each of the projects that are affiliated with the Chaos project also have their own websites where the projects are like fully documented about. But the README is sort of like a primer to explain to you this is what to expect, this is what we do, this is who we are, and this is people that you can reach out to in case you need help. Also, the Turing Way is like a whole book. It's not all the documentation, but if you want to get like a brief understanding of what the Turing Way is, who to reach out to in case you need help, every single thing you need is on the README. Right, so I think we have the next 10 minutes ish, so 5 minutes for um the activity. This is a good way to figure out what information exactly you'd like to put on your README, right? So I can't tell if I'm still sharing my screen. I should still be sharing my screen. Awesome. So what the project does, why the project is useful, how users can get started with the project, where users can get help with your project, who maintains and contributes to the project. So the both of the last two topics can sort of like be merged, because where users can get help with your project might also lead them to having to look for who maintains and contributes to the project. But if you're not sure what information, for example, like I said, the Turing Way is like the Turing template is very um, large, and it's created so you can have all the information that you need. But it can also be like a lot for you to not know where to start from if you're trying to decide what information to put on your README. So just narrowing it down to these 5 different headings and then working from there, and probably expanding if you decide that you want to, is like a helpful tip. So in case maybe you want to create your README, or you are trying to figure out what information in particular should be there, you can just use these 5 headings to implement them.